I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is The Week in Review.
Every week we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, Armenia and Turkey launch formal trade relations. Putin demands clarity on Armenia's European ambitions, and Brussels releases its first progress report on Armenia's visa liberalization process. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news. Turkey and Armenia have officially launched formal trade relations, completing the administrative and bureaucratic steps necessary for direct commerce between the two countries, a significant milestone in the normalization process that began in 2022. Turkish Foreign Ministry confirmed that the required regulatory groundwork has now been finalized, allowing goods to be formally recognized as traded directly between Armenia and Turkey, even when transported through a third country. Armenia's Foreign Ministry welcomed the announcement, calling it an important step toward the development of full-fledged and normal relations. Armenia's State Revenue Committee outlined the practical implications for businesses, noting that Armenian companies can now import Turkish goods directly in their own name, eliminating the need for intermediaries. Armenia's Ministry of Economy said the move is expected to reduce costs and delivery times while creating new opportunities for trade and market expansion. Meanwhile, efforts to physically reopen the Armenia-Turkey land border are continuing. A bilateral working group met on April 28 to discuss the restoration of railway connections between the two countries, a key component of the broader normalization process. The development was also welcomed internationally. The U.S. said the move demonstrates both countries' commitment to expanding economic connectivity in the South Caucasus, while the EU described it as a remarkable development with the potential to increase trade and generate broader regional economic opportunities. Armenian Deputy Prime Minister Meher Grigoryan met this week with visiting U.S. delegations to discuss progress on the implementation of TRIP. Representatives from the U.S. State Department and the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation reviewed ongoing work and resolved a number of operational and legal issues related to the project. Separately, Grigoryan also met with representatives from the American engineering and consulting firm AECOM, which has begun site survey and feasibility assessment work in Armenia under the State Department's Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment Initiative. Company officials presented the scope and expected results of the feasibility study they will conduct. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Armenia should clarify its position on potential EU integration versus continued membership in the Eurasian Economic Union, suggesting that a referendum could be held to determine the Armenian public's preference. Speaking at a press conference, Putin said Armenia benefits considerably from Eurasian Economic Union membership and argued it would be fair to both Armenian citizens and Russia, as Armenia's primary economic partner, to reach a decision promptly. We would make our own corresponding conclusions and proceed along the path of a soft, civilized, and mutually beneficial divorce, Putin said. He stated that Moscow would support whatever decision serves the interests of the Armenian people, citing centuries of close relations between the two nations. He added that Armenia's EU aspirations had been discussed repeatedly with Prime Minister Pashinyan. Putin drew a comparison to Ukraine, warning against pushing the issue to extremes. He recalled that then President Yanukovych's hesitation over a EU association agreement ultimately led to a change of government, the Crimea situation, and conflict in eastern Ukraine. This is a serious matter. It should not be pushed to extremes, he said. Russian State Duma Speaker Volodin drew a parallel between Armenia's growing ties with the European Union and the early stages of the Ukraine conflict. The question has become obvious. Will our states grow closer or more distant after Pashinyan's actions? Will there be less tension or more? More likely the latter, Volodin wrote in a social media post. This is exactly how things began in Ukraine. Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan told reporters that Armenia will make the choice when the time comes. When we understand that Armenia must choose between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union, we will make that choice, he said, adding that nothing has changed in the country's current position as a full member of the Eurasian Economic Union. Prime Minister Pashinyan also pushed back, saying no referendum is planned unless there is an objective necessity for one, which he said does not currently exist. Pashinyan also rejected Putin's framing of a potential separation as a divorce divorce, arguing that interstate relations should not be confused with marriage. The Prime Minister stressed that Yerevan has no intention of harming Russian interests while remaining committed to its own state interests. He acknowledged an inevitable transformation underway in Armenian-Russian relations, which he called positive, and confirmed Armenia's continued pursuit of EU membership through democratic reforms. Pashinyan also pushed back against Russia's criticism following Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's statements at the European Political Community Summit held in Yerevan. The dispute centers on remarks Zelensky made at the summit, where he hinted or appeared to threaten that Ukrainian drones would be flying over Red Square in Moscow during Russia's May 9 Victory Day parade. The comments drew sharp reactions from the Kremlin, which accused Armenia of providing a platform for anti-Russian rhetoric. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Moscow viewed Armenia's hosting of such statements as abnormal and out of step with the spirit of Russian-Armenian relations. Peskov added that Moscow was expecting clarifications from Yerevan and questioned why the Armenian Prime Minister had not attempted to balance Zelensky's remarks with statements of his own. Pashinyan dismissed the criticism. He argued that as the host country's leader at a multilateral forum, it was not his role to censor or respond to every speech that was delivered. This week, Prime Minister Pashinyan confirmed that Armenia had received nuclear power plant construction proposals from Russia, the United States, France, and South Korea, emphasizing that Yerevan's decision will be based purely on economic rather than geopolitical considerations. Speaking to reporters, Pashinyan responded to earlier remarks by Mikhail Kalugin, the director of the CIS Department of Russia's Foreign Ministry, who stated that Rosatom, this is a Russian company, had offered Armenia a large-scale nuclear plant capable of meeting the country's energy needs for decades or even a century ahead, while also providing cheap electricity tariffs that would significantly boost industrial growth. Pashinyan said Armenia has chosen to opt for a modular nuclear power plant, which is safer and does not pose the risk of a Chernobyl-like scenario. He acknowledged that Russia also has modular plants, but the Russian models are floating, requiring a body of water, and are not applicable for Armenia. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom has imposed sanctions on individuals and organizations accused of participating in Russian foreign influence operations, including 2 entities previously linked to efforts aimed at shaping Armenia's domestic political landscape. The designations announced by the Foreign Office target organizations linked to the Russian presidential administration and engaged in coordinated influence campaigns. The Social Design Agency, previously designated in October 2024 and widely attributed as the operator of the Doppelganger network, is reported to have planned campaigns aimed at establishing pro-Russia organizations inside Armenia and engineering a shift in political power toward pro-Russian figures. These campaigns were assessed as almost certainly tasked by the Russian presidential administration. Separately, ANO Dialogue is reported to have coordinated with Russian intelligence services on interference plans directed at Armenian domestic politics. No further details on the scope, timeline, or outcomes of either operation in Armenia have been disclosed. In related news, a confidential document obtained by the Swedish outlet Blank Spot outlines a Russian operation aimed at weakening Pashinyan's civil contract party before the parliamentary election on June 7. The document, titled Program for Work in the Anti-Pashinyan Direction for 2026, describes plans to frame the vote as a referendum on Pashinyan personally, expand a network of pro-Russian opinion makers from 50 to roughly 40 individuals, and increase Russia-aligned social media content from 1 to 3 million views per day. It also references false flag campaigns, targeted comment operations against ruling party workers, and embedding aligned figures in opposition party candidate lists. In other news, the European Union will support Armenia's aspirations toward closer European integration, EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos said at a press briefing. Only the people of Armenia can decide about their future, she said. The last European Political Community meeting and the EU-Armenia summit have shown what kind of way they want to go, and Europe will support them. Kos was responding to a question about recent statements by Russian President Putin, who over the weekend indicated his displeasure at Armenia's European orientation, and according to the transcript suggested for the first time that Ukraine's earlier move toward European integration may have been a factor behind Russia's full-scale invasion. The European Commission has published its first progress report on Armenia's implementation of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan, praising Armenian authorities for demonstrating strong political commitment toward the reform process. The report notes progress in areas including biometric passport modernization, border management reforms, and anti-corruption measures. However, Brussels says significant work remains, particularly in strengthening institutional independence, improving anti-corruption enforcement, protecting fundamental rights, and fully aligning Armenia's document security and border systems with European standards. The Commission also raised concerns about prison overcrowding, the lack of a comprehensive anti-discrimination law, delays in establishing an independent data protection authority, and Armenia's failure to ratify the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women. Despite the shortcomings, the EU said the visa liberalization dialogue is moving forward, with additional assessment missions planned. The report also noted a significant increase in Schengen visas issued to Armenian citizens in recent years. Armenia's parliament has approved legislation introducing a new biometric identification system aligned with the International Civil Aviation Organization standards, a key step in the country's ongoing visa liberalization process with the EU. The reform will introduce new biometric passports and mandatory national ID cards for citizens over the age of 16. Officials say the system is part of Armenia's broader digitalization strategy, with major infrastructure upgrades expected by late 2026. Former Artsakh Foreign Minister David Babayan has sent an audio message to his family from prison in Azerbaijan, claiming that appeal documents submitted to the court regarding the convictions of imprisoned former Artsakh officials had disappeared. Babayan said he fears Azerbaijani authorities may attempt to block his ability to appeal what he described as a fabricated verdict. He added that the former Artsakh leadership intends to pursue the case in international courts. Babayan also said the text of his final courtroom statement was confiscated after he was transferred from solitary confinement to prison on April 21. Azerbaijan has charged Babayan and other former Artsakh officials with terrorism, war crimes, and genocide. In the recording, Babayan described the proceedings in Baku as an ethno-political vendetta against Armenians and alleged serious violations of due process. He claimed that some witnesses presented during the trial did not recognize him and confused him with former Artsakh Security Council Secretary Vitaly Balasanyan. Babayan also called for the publication of the final courtroom statements delivered by the detained former Artsakh leadership. And with elections just weeks away, as always, here is our Elections Digest. Armenia's parliamentary election campaign has officially been underway for 1 week as allegations of vote buying and other election-related violations continue to emerge. In its latest announcement, the Anti-Corruption Committee said members affiliated with the Armenia Alliance are under investigation. According to investigators, the head of the alliance's office in the town of Spidak allegedly provided money to a voter in the form of charity after the official campaign period had begun, despite legal restrictions banning charitable activities during elections. The committee also released intercepted audio recordings that it says shows suspects coordinating vote-buying schemes, compiling voter lists, and discussing methods of influencing or pressuring voters. Some conversations reportedly involved distributing money in exchange for political support and encouraging residents to publicly demonstrate allegiance to particular political forces. The Anti-Corruption Committee also said it had uncovered 2 separate cases of alleged vote buying and other election-related violations tied to Strong Armenia. In the first case, investigators said the head of the Merdzevov NGO had distributed bribes to several voters in exchange for support for the party. Authorities also alleged that the same individual gave money to a resident of Yerevan for surgery under the guise of charity during the election period. In the second case, the committee said the party's local coordinator in the village of Bagramyan in the Armavir region had promised and distributed bribes to several voters in exchange for their support. Investigators also alleged that residents had been paid to attend party rallies. Criminal cases have been opened in all of these investigations, and several people have been detained. 4 school principals have submitted resignation letters after reports that teachers were mobilized during working hours to attend a campaign rally for the ruling Civil Contract Party. Speaking to reporters during a campaign event in Yerevan on May 14, Pashinyan said the resignations came on his orders, though the dismissals have not yet been finalized pending an internal investigation. The controversy follows reports alleging that teachers from a school in the village of Perkarat in Arakazodun region were transported by minibus to the town of Abaran during working hours to participate in a civil contract campaign rally. Two teachers told News AM that class hours had been shortened to allow attendance. Pashinyan said anyone found to have used administrative resources to pressure citizens into attending political rallies would face consequences. He added that the same would apply to those attempting to prevent participation in campaign events through administrative pressure. The Prime Minister also criticized the use of, administrative resources in election campaigns, saying such practices undermine direct engagement with voters. Earlier, the Aganades observation mission had also raised concerns regarding this incident. The Armenia Alliance said it had postponed a planned campaign meeting in the town of Tallinn after local authorities informed the bloc that the previously agreed to venue would no longer be available because of Pashinyan's visit that same day. In a statement, the alliance accused authorities of abusing administrative resources to obstruct opposition campaigning. The Armenia Alliance also announced that it has launched a fact-finding initiative into alleged electoral coercion ahead of the elections. In a statement, the political force said it had received reports that employees of state institutions and local government bodies were being pressured to vote for the ruling party under threat of dismissal. According to the bloc, employee lists are being compiled to better organize the process and create the impression of oversight and control. The alliance said it was collecting evidence to expose and prevent such violations, urging whistleblowers to provide identifying information about those making threats, as well as audio or video recordings where possible. The alliance said coercing individuals to vote through the abuse of official authority is punishable by 4 to 8 years in prison and called on public officials to refrain from unlawful actions. It also reminded voters that ballots are secret and that no one has the right or ability to monitor how citizens vote. And Prime Minister Pashinyan has filed a defamation suit against Samvel Garabedian. During a briefing last week, Garabedian alleged that Pashinyan had brought 1 ton of hallucinogenic mushrooms from China and used them before public speeches. The lawsuit demands that Garabedian publicly retract the statement and pay 6 million dirhams, or about $15,000 in compensation for non-material damages caused by defamation. And about the articles that we published this week. We are starting to do our primers on the elections, and Hovannes Nazaretian put together a piece called Party Positions, Foreign Policy and Security. These two areas have emerged as defining issues in Armenia's campaign season, with parties sharply divided over relations with Russia, deeper integration with the West, regional normalization, TRIP, and the country's broader geopolitical direction amid growing uncertainty. We also published a very interesting piece by Ani Bogosyan called Tamara Khanum, Reclaiming Dance as Defiance, an Armenian exile's daughter who became one of the Soviet Union's most celebrated performers. Tamara Khanum used dance to challenge patriarchy, embody cultural resistance, and redefine womanhood in Central Asia, even as her art was folded into the Soviet project. And a piece by our creative tech section editor Ani Toroyan called Armenia's Tech Labor Market Faces a Triple Shock, and she argues that the tech labor market in the country is being reshaped by 3 converging shocks: a global venture capital slowdown, geopolitical fallout from the Russia-Ukraine war, and the rapid rise of AI. Together, they are transforming hiring, redefining skills, and exposing vulnerabilities in the country's tech growth model. And then we have an extensive investigation by Gibran Caroline Boyce and Don Kegel called How Armenia and Azerbaijan Are Lobbying for Influence in D.C. So they write that as Armenia and Azerbaijan are competing for influence in Washington, a new lobbying battle is reshaping U.S. engagement in the South Caucasus. From diaspora advocacy to multi-million-dollar lobbying campaigns, both sides are working to influence American policy, peace efforts, and regional power dynamics. And we published a piece today by Tallinn Unjan called Crimea Hrazdan River. And it's a very interesting piece about, the river that runs through Yerevan and how it embodies the city's contradictions, both beauty and neglect, belonging and exclusion, ecological loss and fragile possibilities for coexistence, public life and environmental consciousness. And she takes a deeper look at what the river reveals about the city itself. We also published our monthly magazine, April on View. That's a compilation of all the articles that we published in the month of April. And I also did an interview with Nerses Kopalian for our State of Play monthly video called No Silver Bullets and Geopolitics. And Armenia is hosting world leaders, deepening ties with Europe and signaling a major diplomatic repositioning, while Moscow is responding with warnings, threats, and growing anxiety. It's a very interesting interview that I'd welcome you to definitely check out. My colleague Rubina Margosian did a podcast in Armenian with Nerses Kopalian called Karozarshav Chors Dogosi Hamar. And for those who would like to listen to an Armenian language podcast about the polling that we've done of the third wave of our polls, you can check that out. And that's the kind of week it's been here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we'll be back again next week.